Great presentation. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we will send you an email tomorrow with a link to a PDF of the slides as well as a recording if you want to go back and review this presentation or have your colleagues review it who weren't able to attend. Which active technology are you using? Is that the same technology you are using for the employee badges?
Yes, it's all the same active technology. It's all from RF Code. Now, from an employee badge point of view, I'm only using it for those employees that have physical access to my data centers. This is not for all 35,000 employees within the hospital system. So it's still a small managed team. It can be used for a lot larger group, obviously, but my focus was just on those folks that had unescorted authorized access to the data center.
Okay, what do you wish you knew before the implementation, things like timing, product features, et cetera, that you know now?
Honestly, I wish I had gone with the RFID temperature sensors instead of with the ones that were built in with my PDUs.
Okay. Is that greater accuracy, greater flexibility? What's the issue there?
Well, it's just where I spent the money at the time. I should have shifted those expenses into a common observability platform like RF Code. That would have put me a little bit farther ahead.
Right, okay. What's the biggest gotcha when deploying an IT hardware asset management system?
Understanding the coverage of the readers. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I had investigated passive RFID systems, and one of those challenges is our portals. Portals require a lot of tuning, a lot of extra work, and in a space like a hospital, if we were considering there are so many exits and so many doorways, it would have been cost prohibitive to put in portals. Even within a data center, because when we're in a colo facility, I don't have the floor space that I could dedicate to a portal to go in and out of my cage. And then that still only lets you know when something passes through the portal. Where an active system, the tags are constantly beaconing. I think it's every 5 seconds, the tags are beaconing to the readers, which means you have virtually real-time location. And 5 seconds is pretty close to real time.
Right. What is the least costly asset that makes sense to tag financially?
I think that's relative to your individual organization. In our organization, we have to track assets that are $5,000 and above. Well, sometimes an individual card in a server, let's say one of those new NVIDIA cards, is $10,000. Well, if I've got 3 of those in a server, that's a lot of expense. So then it gets into this kind of back and forth with finance, at least in our case, of what are you tagging? So luckily in those cases, we've kind of made an agreement the entire server is tagged. So then now that's, if we have 3 times 10,000 just for video cards, there's $30,000 just in video plus the cost of the server. So, you're in that $40,000 to $50,000 range for a server. That being said, if I go over and look at a networking card, depending on the type of equipment it is, if it's less than $5,000, do I tag it just because it's there? I don't know. The nice thing about RF Code and what I really like is, yes, they are active tags. They are more expensive than a passive tag, but you get a lot more value out of it. But it also allows me to then justify a 100% accuracy on, let's say, loose hard drives. In our world, we have to constantly be worried about the loss of patient data. The guys on the ground at a data center don't know what kind of data is on a given hard drive. So we assume it's all protected information. We err on the side of caution. So we tag every single hard drive and track it all the way to destruction. And it's that and that coverage from a HIPAA or a high-tech type of audit is invaluable in my book.
Okay. You mentioned that the batteries broadcast every 5 seconds. What's the battery life given that 5-second broadcast, and does it double if you go to 10 seconds? Maybe Jonathan?
I think Jonathan Ross will be able to.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So everybody, this is Jonathan. So in this situation, if a 10-second tag from RF code has a battery life of 5 to 7 years. And so all of the asset tags, they're actually in a sonically welded case. And you got to think they're used to being attached to servers and different types of assets where you're going to have a rack door banged on them that could be moved from different types of assets. And so that's why we seal that case very tightly. With that said, you can't change the battery, but it's a 5 to 7 year battery life. And through our software, we'll actually alert you at 20% capacity. So you'll know well ahead of time if you need to change one of the tags out. For the environmental sensors, they last about 3 to 5 years. There's just a little more power draw needed, but they do have a field replaceable battery. And once again, the software can alert you any kind of changes that need to be made.
Okay. What is the maximum distance where a reader will capture the ping from the tag?
So that's a great question. So we've found that in dense metal environments, and we use, not to get too geeky, but we use 433 megahertz along with infrared to help us with our locationing. For 433 megahertz, we find that in a dense data center environment or dense metal environment, we recommend reader placements about 1 every 3,500 square feet. So what that means is you can put a tag on a rack, shut the door, and then read it reliably, probably 35 feet away from most directions. In an open office environment, that could be anywhere between 10 to 12,000 square feet. We use 433 just because it bends and creeps and crawls around through metal. So unless it's really in a Faraday cage, it tends to propagate quite well.
Okay. And how does the reader communicate to the central server, which could be hundreds of miles away?
Standard TCP/IP protocols over the network. You can work them over Wi-Fi if you'd like. Most customers will use power over Ethernet and just give it a static IP address and plug it into the network.
Okay. How broad of asset classes have you covered? Any manufacturing equipment, furniture? Well, let's stop there. There's a little bit more, but is it mainly IT assets?
That's a great question. Yes, so data center and IT assets is one part of our business. If you look at RF Code, we really are an asset tracking company. And with that said, we track not only specific things to a data center, so think servers and rack-mounted devices, but also IT devices that are adjacent to that. So laptops, iPads, shareable type devices. We also have a couple other lines of businesses that work on industrial assets. So we'll have our tags placed on pipe fittings in the northern slope of Alaska, all the way to plant carts in Home Depots and Lowe's. So we actually have a very diverse asset tracking business. If people have questions around that, just rfcode.com/sales, and you can reach out to us and we can have those conversations.
Okay. Have you had any frequent failure modes on any of those categories, like certain types of materials, stainless steel, plastic, for example?
Oh, not so much of that. Occasionally you will have situations where if we're deployed in a hospital environment, if some type of high-end solvent gets in behind a tag, you have some things like that. We've done a lot of research into our plastics and our metals and our PCBs to make sure that the tag is optimized for the type of environment that it's in. And that's a very specific thing. So we do have tags, as I mentioned, are sonically welded with a gasket where the PCB and the battery are built into the product. So literally it can withstand snow and rain and wind and dust and all kinds of things. Whereas tags that are more built for an indoor environment, that gives us a little more flexibility with things like being able to touch the air. Because if we can touch the air, then we can actually give you real-time data on what the current temperature is, what the humidity is, and then do things like calculate dew point, so moisture levels within the air. So the tags truly are built to which the environment they're going to operate in.
Okay. Mario, was it difficult to justify the investment in the system with your finance department?
So it was always a challenge early on prior to our big data center move. But once we got into the data center migration project, then it was an easy ask. And once the system was put in and demonstrated the accuracy during that migration, adding the new capabilities has been a no-brainer for everyone.
Okay. What do you think was the most difficult aspect when expanding outside the core data center?
The hardest problem is handing that off to other teams, because asset management is not necessarily the priority of, not to throw my networking team brethren under the bus, but it's not always top of their minds, right? So that's always probably the hardest challenge, when it's your primary focus and you're asked to kind of shift that and scale that out to other teams, which means now you have to rely on other teams to start doing a lot of the legwork. Once they start seeing the value and how it makes their life easier and solves the problems that they were having before, whether they recognize they have problems or is generally the case, then it really starts to get traction.
Okay. Jonathan, are you aware of any tags that can go below 40 degrees Celsius?
That's really, really cold. I think you're maybe looking to track stuff down into like a sub-freezing type environments. We can have that conversation. We can make some recommendations.
Okay. Is there an image of a tag and reader in this presentation to show what it looks like?
I know we had a few pictures of tags. Again, I'll just invite anybody to go to our website, rfcode.com. There's 3 sections: asset management, environmental monitoring, power monitoring. If you can click on those, they'll actually go into these sections called how it works. And we have little videos, we have pictures of what deployments look like, and get an idea of what different tags and readers and sensors look like.
So there's one asset tag on your screen now, if you take a look at that. Okay. What about HIPAA concerns with readers at your hospital locations?
So there's no real concerns, because the reader itself is only listening for the tag beaconing back. So really the only information that's coming back to the reader is the tag information. And the only information on the tag is the ID of the tag, and if there's an IR additional code that goes along with it. So there's no processing of any patient data by those readers.
What's the smallest possible tag size in metric scale?
You hit me there. I was actually just trying to pull up It looks like it is 39 millimeters by 32 millimeters by 8 millimeters.
Okay, seems pretty small.
Yeah, I think half the size of a book of matches is a good reference.
Right. Is the return on investment mainly from the labor saved associated with managing assets, or is there a capital expenditure savings from improving asset utilization?
That's a difficult one, because depending on which one of my peer teams, how they're leveraging their assets. Some systems, like I'm saying, the storage team, they're constantly refreshing their assets. The tracking of them is not necessarily the big cost savings. We're actually now seeing much more value. The ROI is now a lot greater because we've added in the security cameras and the people tags. So our security side of ROI is significantly better. And then the obvious reduction in human costs from doing a physical walkthrough inventory the old way is significantly reduced.
Okay. How do the tags on employees link to the security cameras? What's the mechanism that allows you to look up a specific day and time on the video? I guess a question for Jonathan.
So it depends on your environment. So RF Code natively, we actually have a product and we have partnerships with different camera companies. So an example, one of those would be Access Systems. And so we actually directly integrate with the API through those cameras, and we can not only broadcast live video through our software stack, but we can also associate alerts directly to that. So as an example, if someone walked into a remote or edge facility and opened up a door rack between, let's say, 5 p.m. and 8 a.m., that's an issue. You want to record a quick video to know who was there, but from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you don't really care. We can just ignore that alert. And so the whole purpose is really just to bring some intelligence to any type of asset movement or environmental alarms that could take place across the enterprise. But that's one way to do direct integration. We've also done some integrations through our API where third-party companies like Genetec, for example, have used our API to integrate directly our code alerts into their own security systems and the VMS consoles and whatnot that they sell. And it's kind of the same principle. If I have 2 laptops and one's allowed to leave and the other one's not, without visual inspection, you don't really know which one can and can't leave. So if both those enter the lobby, we could actually trigger an alarm saying, hey, there's a laptop here that's not allowed to leave. And then from there, that could go to your security team or however you want to handle it.
Right. Okay. Is tagging assets in the receiving logistics process a best practices across industries?
I believe it is.
Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, we've actually gone as far now where we have a lot of customers who will have their IT vendors pre-tag those assets with RF code tags. You know, instead of putting a barcode or something else on there, they'll actually go ahead and tag the asset with an RF code tag. That gets delivered via a flat file that gets automatically imported into our software. And so what happens is the second that asset shows up, since we can read it through a pallet or a box, as soon as it hits the loading or receiving dock, we can automatically tell the system this asset's been received. And you can do some pretty unique things with that. One, you could have an integration with your ERP system to start prepay for that asset because you know you've received it and you're no longer having to wait for someone to physically check that in. But moreover, you can also start calculating what we call dwell time, which is how long an asset sits in a certain area. How long does it sit in receiving? How long does it sit in storage? How long is it in burn-in? That type of thing. And you start to calculate now what your capital at rest risk is by having assets sit in these areas too long. And the best way is just go ahead and kick that off of having the assets show up pre-tagged.
Okay. We have a medical equipment rental company with asset values ranging from $200 to $4,000. We could have hundreds of items in a warehouse. Do you have any use case examples that would help us understand your thoughts on capital justification?
So yeah, I can give you one specific example. This is a warehouse. This will be things that are in a warehouse or storage area that then move out of that perimeter area. We like to call those kind of returnable assets. And what we're talking about is tracking carts that only have a retail value of about $120. However, there's a business tied to the rental of that cart. So knowing exactly how many carts are in each location, each storage warehouse, and then out to other areas is how they actually run their rental business. So that's when they start leases and end leases, things like that. So they're able to move those carts around in real time, different stations. So they're not hoarding in one area and they have a provision enough into an area. And so that's how they're actually running their business, is the real-time visibility of where all these very inexpensive carts happen to be. So to me, it's always not just the value of the asset itself, it's the value that that asset brings to your business and the criticality of tracking that asset, against your business practice. And so it's how we look at it. Anything else more specific on use case, I'd love to have a conversation with you, outside of this.
Okay, gentlemen, we're just about out of time. Thank you very much. Terrific presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, folks, just as a reminder, we'll send you an email tomorrow with a link to a PDF of the slides that were presented here today, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar. You can review this presentation and any previous RFID Journal virtual events or webinars by going to rfidjournal.com/RFID-journal.